This is Nobody Cares. I was watching TV, and this is decades ago now, and the program was about archaeologists, and they were all excited because a body had been found in the Gobi Desert, and it had been there for several hundred years. I just forget what they said on the show. Because that dry sand had packed in so tightly around the body, he was perfectly preserved. Now, there were still so many mysteries about this man, like what the hell was he doing out in the middle of the Gobi Desert, that sort of thing. But they had discovered a few things. One, he was a white man, and he was wearing tartan. Like I say, all his clothes, everything had been almost perfectly preserved, as well as you could ever expect. And so they're showing that he was from, maybe it wasn't called Scotland way back then, but from that part of the world. And one of the other things that they discovered was that he had hashish in one of his pockets. The man liked to have a toke. So to talk about some of the history of weed, I kind of hate to put it that way, I'm some sort of official historian, but you have to go back and talk about Pierre Trudeau. And he was prime minister from the late 60s and through the 70s with successive majority governments. He was really, really very popular, Trudeau mania and all that. And he came into politics late. He was not a career politician. I really can't stand those guys. And Pierre came in with specific ideas in mind. One of them was to repatriate the Constitution. That was a good idea, and he did do that. Gay marriage, not marriage, but discrimination against gays was... he actually made the statement at some point that the government had no business in the bedroom of the nations. And he was referring to gays with that. He was not talking about heterosexual couples. And throughout his mandate, he did go through the Canadian legal system and remove any laws that Canada had discriminating against gays. That is way, way ahead of his time. It's hard to describe what it was like back in those days. But here we are 50 years later, and we hear stories about, people being executed in Saudi Arabia simply because they're gay. And just recently, within the last, 3 or 4 months on the news, they were talking about some tin pot country in Africa had just passed new laws discriminating against gays. So, man, he was way ahead of his time. And Pierre Trudeau did something that I think was truly amazing. He set up a commission. It was one of the first things he did. This was in the 60s when he did this, 68, maybe it was 69, I don't remember. Set up a commission to study the effects of marijuana. It was called the Ledane Commission, and was headed by a retired Superior Court judge from Quebec, Gerald Ledane. So the Ledane Commission was out for at least 2 years. They took their time on this. And when they did come back, they said that marijuana was no more harmful than alcohol, tobacco, or putting too much cream in your strawberries. They recommended that marijuana be removed from the Narcotic Act and be treated in a similar fashion to alcohol. Well, very reasonable. Like you can't stand on a street corner and guzzle a beer, and so you would not be able to stand on the street corner and smoke a joint, right? Pretty reasonable way to look at things. They also recommend that people be allowed to cultivate their own marijuana for personal use. Now, it's difficult for me to go back that far with my memory. I don't really have memory of how this was being treated in the media or with just like the word on the street. But I can imagine that, the conservatives, they would have been losing their minds, right? I mean, drugs, Jesus. But anyway, throughout this period, just after the Ledane Commission came back with all these recommendations, and I can't really talk about how much time goes by here, it's too long ago, but the Americans were not happy about the Ledane report and its recommendations. And they told Trudeau that if he went ahead with relaxing the marijuana laws, that Canada would be the sorriest country on earth from now until the end of time. Well, that's a pretty heavy statement. And I mean, it's our friends, our buddies to the south here, and our biggest trading partners, the country that we rely on, really, in my opinion, 100% for our defense. They would never allow China or Russia to invade North America. And Canada left on its own in a situation like that, it'd be all over by coffee time, let's face it, right? And so the whole thing just sort of drifted off into the mist, and nothing happened. Life just continued on the way it was. Marijuana stayed illegal, and another 50 years of prohibition. So at that time, the early to mid-70s, say, a gram of hash on the prairies would cost you $7. And that's a fact. I can say it's a fact because I was the guy selling it. All the laws of commerce do apply. Like if a couple guys got together and bought a quarter ounce, they'd get it for less than that. And anybody who didn't know where to get a gram had to go through somebody else. It was going to be $8 by the time it got to them. But, it's just all normal stuff. I don't really know who my audience here is going to be, so I'm going to give you an idea what the cost of living was at that time. And I have a little booklet. I'd had it my whole life. It was tucked away down in a trunk, and I guess I'd sort of half forgotten about it, and I just recently downsized and was getting rid of stuff, and I came across this. And it's a booklet from the Saskatchewan Liquor Board Commission, 1971, with all their products in there, all the alcohol that they sold, and the price in there. And so I marked down a few of those. And a bottle of Smirnoff, a 26er, $5.75. Bottle of whiskey, Seagram's 5-star, $5.70. And I was quite surprised looking through there to see Crown Royal. I had no idea that Crown Royal had been around that long. And it's more, of course, $8.75 for a 26er. And best for last, case of beer, $2.95. And that's bottles, of course. We didn't have cans back in those days. And just out of curiosity, now I don't often Google or do any research for any of these things. I prefer just to go from my memory. But I got wondering what the price of gas was back in those days, and I found the website, and this even shocked me, even though I lived through those times. A gallon of gas, 1974, 53 cents. Now that's a gallon. So there's 4.5 liters to a gallon. So that works out to about 12 cents a liter. I worked on the oil rigs back then. I won't go into too much detail. I worked 2 winters on the rigs. And my starting wage there, roughneck wage, was $3.25 an hour. And there's 2 people that work on the platform. There's 2 roughnecks. One guy's called a motorman, and he gets $3.50 an hour. He has the added responsibility of keeping an eye on the big diesel engines, making sure that the oil doesn't get too low, that sort of thing. So pretty easy to figure from that, right? $3.50, 2 hours, $7. That was top money back in those days. You could not get a job anywhere for any money. Like retail would probably be half that, maybe $2 an hour, something like that. I don't really know, but we made top money on the rigs, and yet it would take 2 hours to buy a gram of hash. You could buy a case of beer. We're working for 1 hour. In October of 1973, I headed off to spend the winter in Europe. And my second stop, I landed in London. That was my first stop. Stayed there for a week, and then made my way to Amsterdam. And one of the things that I wanted to do when I was there was visit one of the hash bars. The Netherlands had relaxed their laws for possession of small amounts of marijuana and hashish, and they also allowed hash to be sold and consumed in the bars over there. Not every bar, but some did and some didn't. And it wasn't too hard to find one of these bars. The place I stayed was right downtown Amsterdam, close to downtown Amsterdam. And so I went in, and there wasn't many people in there that day. I remember that. It was kind of in the afternoon, I guess. And there were two guys sitting at the bar rolling a hash joint with tobacco, and they crumble the hash up. And so I was watching this, and I decided to sit right at the bar as well, just down a ways from them. I didn't crowd them at all, and ordered a beer. And on the mirror behind the bar, it was just a piece of paper, and written on there was the types of hash that were available that day in the bar there, and the price. Now, I can't tell you what those were, but I mean, there's only so many available in the world, right? So I know that these two guys they had some black hash that they were rolling. There was Moroccan hash was on that list. So I don't really remember, so I'm not going to say. And there was different prices, of course. You're not going to pay the same for Moroccan hash as you would for a decent black commercial Afghan, something like that. And I do remember this, is that it was $3.50 is what you were going to pay for the better quality hash that was being sold in the bar that day. Now, I have to explain this, okay? Because in those days, the way you traveled was with American Express traveler's checks. Everybody did, period. So I'm Canadian, obviously, and there's an exchange rate. So you're buying these traveler checks, they're in American currency. And there's an exchange rate, of course. I don't know what it is now, what it was then. I can't tell you what it was then now, but I knew what it was then. I'm making this too complicated here. And then the currency in the Netherlands at that time was guilders, not euros. That came quite a bit later. So you get these three different calculations to make, okay? How many guilders there was to an American dollar, and then the conversion back into Canadian dollars. But I do remember doing all that whole process. This is not something I did very often at all, if really ever. It's very rare, but I was really interested in getting this price and knowing how much Canadian it was. And so $3.50. So simply by removing any threat of arrest and the social stigma attached to that brought the price of hash down by half. Now, I know that's a pretty bold statement, that there's other factors that go into it. You're going to say, well, there's a big ocean and another border to cross. And, well, that's true. But when I was in London, I bought a gram of hash over there just on the street from a guy that he kind of approached me, actually. And I paid approximately $8 Canadian for that gram of hash. And I knew at the time that I was paying too much, and he probably knew that he could get away with it. England is only like, I don't know, half an hour from France, or like it's very, very, very close, okay? So I'm taking that into consideration here as well. And I'm also, the 350 really isn't accurate. It's accurate as far as what they were selling it in the bar for, but the hostel that I was staying in, hash was available there for less than that. And I didn't bother going through the whole conversion business, like it's too much really. But it was more in the range of $3 for a gram of hash. And certainly, like I've already said, the rules of commerce apply here. Like if you wanted to buy a quarter ounce, it would have been less than that, obviously. So I'm just going to add in here, I don't want people thinking that I was running around drinking beer and smoking hash all the time that I was over there. Oh, you know what? I forgot to mention the beer. I have to mention this because this is something else that I did figure out the difference on. I went to university in Saskatoon in 1971, 72. dumb waste of time. But anyway, at that time, draft beer was 21 cents a glass. And you could actually buy 5 at a time for $1, okay? Beer in Amsterdam, I paid that day, I think it might be the only beer that I bought the time when I was in Amsterdam. In fact, I'm pretty sure it is, was 40 cents. That's double, okay? So when you kind of try and configure that in your mind, you're paying twice as much for beer and half as much for hash. That adds to it as well, okay? So I'm glad I thought of that before I got going too much further here. But really, once I left Amsterdam, I didn't stay there very long. It was cold and miserable. It was raining, and I had a rail pass, so I wanted to get on the train and just go see the country. So that's what I did. And honestly, once I left there, and I had this little bit of black hash left, once that was gone, the next time I bought any hash was in the Canary Islands at Christmas time. So, and that's when I met up with a friend. I'd been traveling by myself all that time when I first got to Europe. And this was prearranged to meet with him. And we ended up going over to Morocco. This is also something that we had planned on doing before we even left home. And in Morocco, where hashish is not illegal and has been a part of their culture for, I don't know how long, a couple thousand years, is dirt cheap. We bought hash the very first night that we arrived in Morocco for 25 cents a gram. And that price was pretty much standard everywhere we went. I don't think that we ever purchased any hash from a Moroccan. Everything we bought was from other Canadians or Americans who were living there for the winter. They're making a few bucks on it because we saw kilos for $100, which would be 10 cents a gram. So these guys are making a few bucks. That's all right. And, obviously, and I've already commented on this in another audio clip that I did, that, anybody buying 100 pounds or more than that, then the price would certainly come way down to, who knows, $60, $70. Hard to say, whatever. How good a negotiator you are, probably. So it's not like I think about these things immediately. It always takes time. And so along my little journey through life here, you have all these experiences and you get thinking back, and why is it that I can go to Morocco and buy hash for 25 cents a gram? Why is that? Well, there's really only one answer to that question. The reason you can buy hash in Morocco for 25 cents is because that's all it's worth. There's no other answer. Hashish is made from the marijuana plant. All it is a plant. You sow it in the spring and you harvest it in the fall. It has no more value than a sack of potatoes or a bag of corn. The only thing that gives cannabis value is the fact that the government made it illegal. So there's something else to mention here when talking about the value of marijuana, and that is medical marijuana. And regardless of what you think about it or anybody else thinks about it, my personal opinion is I think it does have value in the medical profession, medicine. And that got me thinking about Big Pharma. Now, most of those companies are privately owned, maybe all privately owned. I don't really know. And so they're interested in profit. They're not charities, let's put it that way, okay? And it'd be just ludicrous to think that at some point that these pharmaceutical companies wouldn't have taken a look at cannabis to see what value there was there. I just wouldn't believe that they had never done that. And it would be interesting if they would, release their findings from what they discovered. But like I say, if there's no money in something, then there's no value for a private company to get involved in it. And it's not a matter of ethics, it's just business. And the only reason I can think of that why Big Pharma would not be involved with medical marijuana is because there's no money in it.